I always wake up at 5 hours and 30 minutes. Even after I retired 10 years ago, the habit of early rising has not left me. Only now I don't rush to shave and put on an iron shirt. Instead, I wander through the empty rooms of a house that grows stranger with each passing day. This morning I discovered that the refrigerator is empty again. Just a half-empty bottle of milk and a piece of dried cheese. Well, what did I expect? Terrence won't arrive until 3 days later with the weekly groceries. Economy, he says. You have to count every penny, Dad, he says. The word penny comes out of his mouth like a curse, as if those very pennies were not part of my pension, earned by 45 years of working with rock samples, going down mines, and endless expeditions to the remotest corners of the earth. The living room met me with the echo of my own footsteps. 5 years ago, it had been Miriam's piano, an antique secretaire we'd gotten from her parents, and a large bookcase full of my geology journals and her novels. Now it's just the couch I've slept on for the last 3 years, an old TV, and emptiness. We need to optimize the space, Dad, Terrence said as he moved the furniture out. The piano's just gathering dust, and you can't take care of it anymore. I didn't argue. He and Esther were having their second child, and they needed money. At least that's what he said. And I believed him. I mean, what else is an old man of 73 not to believe his own son? Especially when your wife, the only person who read you like an open book, died of terminal cancer. Miriam would never let her piano be taken out. She played every night, even on the days when the disease had almost overcome her. Beethoven, Chopin, sometimes Rachmaninoff. The melody poured through the house, filling every corner of it, making even the most ordinary evenings special. You're in the clouds again, Cedric, she often said, shaking her head. Come down to earth, see what's going on around you. But I've always been more interested in the rocks underground than the people on the surface. That's why I chose geology. Rocks and minerals were easier to understand than emotions and talk. They didn't deceive, they didn't betray. Quartz always remained quartz. Basalt always remained basalt. People changed, became strangers before your eyes, like Terrence. My only son, once a shy boy with a love of astronomy and dreams of space. Now he's a 40-year-old man with balding hair and a perpetually disgruntled expression, a financial analyst, as he calls himself, the man who has taken over the management of my pension. You're getting old, Dad, he said after Miriam died. I'm worried you won't be able to manage your money properly. Let me help you. And I agreed, grateful to be taken care of, to not be all alone, for someone who thinks I'm important enough to come once a week. Even if those visits consisted mostly of sighs and remarks about my inability to take care of myself. The kitchen window overlooks the neglected garden. Miriam was always proud of her roses and hydrangeas. Now there are only weeds and bare earth. The gardener had to be fired 2 years ago. It's a waste of money, Dad, Terrence explained. I'd rather come and mow the grass once in a while. Roses, what do you need them for? You don't even go out in the garden. I don't go out because it hurts more to see it like this than not to see it at all. Like the empty shelves where our pictures used to be. Terrence has most of them now. For safekeeping, he said, to show our grandchildren. As I drink instant coffee, the last can, to save money, I think of the times when our kitchen was filled with the aromas of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods. Miriam loved to cook on weekends, turning ordinary breakfasts into celebrations. Terrence loved those moments too, before he met Esther and suddenly found that everything about his parents wasn't good enough for his new life. Esther, a skinny woman with sharp facial features and an even sharper tongue. She looks at me like I'm a burden, and she doesn't even try to hide it. I don't blame her, though. To her, I'm just an old man standing between her and her inheritance. Remember, Miriam, I whisper, staring at the empty wall where her portrait used to hang. You warned me about her. Said all she saw in our boy was a wallet and prospects, but I dismissed it at the time. My son's happiness seemed more important than anything else. And here I am now, sitting in a half-empty house, eating instant oatmeal and counting the days until Terrence's next visit, bringing me groceries bought with my own money, $7,000, my monthly pension. A lot of money earned through decades of work, discoveries, consulting for major oil companies. Where does it go? Terrence brings me an expense printout every month. Utility bills, groceries, medicine. But the numbers don't add up. I'm good enough at math to know that. I just don't dare say so. I'm afraid of losing even the little bit of attention I get now. After breakfast, I go to my office. The only room that still reminds me of the old days. Terrence didn't move my mineral collections and books out of there. Who needs them, Dad? Let them stay with you. On the table is an amethyst specimen given to Miriam for our 20th anniversary. She always remembered things like that. Dates, gifts, special moments. I often forgot, immersed in work and research. You live in a world of stones, Cedric, she said with a laugh. I have to be earthy for both of us. But now without her, it's as if I've lost my anchor, drifting between the past and the present, unable to find a place here or there. The only thing holding me together are memories and a strange mixture of duty and guilt to my son. Duty because I wasn't a good father to him. Often absent, away on expeditions for months at a time. Missed his first steps, his first words, his school concerts. Guilt because I couldn't keep him from becoming a man who only cared about money and status. He became like that because of me, Miriam, I say to the emptiness of the room. I set an example for him of a man who put his work before his family, but deep down, I know it's just an attempt to justify what's happening. I mean, how do you admit that your own son is using you? How do you accept the idea that you're nothing more than a source of income to him? The phone's ringing. The only luxury Terrence left me was a landline for emergencies. He took the cell phone away a year ago. Too expensive, Dad. You don't need it anyway. This is Cedric Blackwell. Mr. Blackwell, this is Chloe from the pharmacy. Your son wanted me to tell you that your meds won't be ready until Friday. There's been a problem with his insurance. Again, for the third month in a row, my blood pressure and arthritis meds have been delayed because of insurance problems, which Terrence is in charge of. Thank you, Chloe. I'll wait. What else can I do? Other than joint pain and intermittent blood pressure spikes, nothing fatal. I'll see you later. I spend the rest of the day rereading old geology journals. Amongst the articles on rock structure and new deposits, there are a few of mine. Cedric Blackwell, a leading expert on sedimentary rocks. A man whose opinion was valued and respected. Now I'm just a shadow of that expert, an old man who can't even control his own finances. It gets especially dreary in the evening. It used to be a time when the house was filled with Miriam's music, the smells of dinner, conversations about the past day. Now there is only silence, broken by the creak of floorboards beneath my feet. Dinner is meager, warmed beans and the last piece of bread. Tomorrow I'll have to do without toast for breakfast, but I'm not complaining, at least not out loud. After all, if Terrence finds out I'm not happy, he might stop coming altogether. And then what? Nursing home? Total loneliness? Before I went to bed, I pulled an old photo album out from under the mattress, the only one I'd managed to hide before Terrence took the rest. I flipped through the pages. Our wedding, Terrence's birth, family vacations, moments of happiness captured on paper. Here is Terrence at the age of 7 holding his first telescope, a gift from me after returning from a long expedition. His eyes glow with delight and adoration. When did that disappear? When was admiration replaced by calculation? Perhaps when he met Esther? Or earlier, when I missed his graduation because of an important conference? Maybe it was a gradual accumulation of small betrayals and absences that eventually became a wall between us. The last photo in the album is of Miriam and me on our 40th anniversary, 6 months before her diagnosis. She's still beautiful, with silver strands in her brown hair and a smile that could always melt my heart. I hold her hand, and I have a look of absolute happiness on my face. A man who doesn't realize he's about to lose everything. I miss you, I whisper the pictures. I don't know how to live without you. I lie down on the sofa, pulling the old blanket up to my chin. The house is cold. Terrence insisted on saving the heat. Wear a sweater, Dad, it's cheaper. I close my eyes and try to imagine Miriam close by. That her hand is on mine, that tomorrow morning I'll wake up to the sound of her fiddling in the kitchen, that my son still loves me, not for my pension, but simply because I'm his father. But fantasies are fantasies. The reality is that I, Cedric Blackwell, 73 years old with a pension of $7,000, go to bed hungry in a half-empty house while my son handles my money. And the scary thing is, I don't even know how to change that. Or maybe I'm just afraid to admit that change is necessary, because then I'd have to face the bitter truth about my only son and what my life has become. The landline phone in the kitchen is the only thing that connects me to the outside world. It suddenly came to life with a rattling ring as I was heating up some leftover canned beans from last night. I hadn't expected the call. Terrence wasn't due until 2 days later, and no one else had called me in months. "Cedric Blackwell here," I said, holding the receiver with my shoulder as I stirred the beans with a wooden spoon. "Ceddy? It's me, Una." My heart skipped a beat. Una. My little sister I haven't seen in… how long? 5 years? No, closer to 6. After Miriam's funeral, she'd come to visit for 2 weeks, but then work and her own family had taken her back to Philly. We called each other less and less until conversations turned to short Christmas greetings and the occasional email that Terrence printed out for me when he took the computer away to be fixed. "Una?" I couldn't hide my surprise. "What's wrong?" Stupid question. As if my sister needed a special reason to call. But that's just the way it is. At our age, sudden calls don't usually bode well. "Since when do I need an excuse to talk to my only brother?" She sounded the same wry irony she'd used to tease me when I was a kid about my fascination with rocks instead of girls. "But since you ask, I'm going to Pendleton for work next week." Well, Lloyd is, and I thought I'd keep him company. Lloyd, her husband of the last 25 years. A calm, judicious anthropology professor, the exact opposite of my impetuous sister with her legal mind. "Pendleton, for how long?" 3 days. We'd love to come over for dinner. Lloyd's dying to see you, and I miss you, big brother." I looked at my kitchen as if I were seeing it through Una's eyes-empty cabinets. No food except 2 eggs and a half-empty can of canned goods. A refrigerator with almost nothing in it. On the stove, a single pot with chipped enamel that Terrence hadn't seen fit to take away. "Of course," I said too quickly. "When exactly will you be here?" "Wednesday night, if that's convenient for you." "About 6 o'clock, Wednesday, 5 days from now." "There's time, but what can I do in 5 days?" "Great, I'll wait for you. Did you write down the address?" Una hummed. "Ceddy, I remember where you live. Same house you've lived in for the last 30 years. I don't think you moved without telling me." I felt a pang of guilt. She'd always known where to find me. It was just that I'd built a wall around me out of my mediocre son and my own embarrassment at what my life had become. Sure. I'd be happy to see you." After talking to my sister, I sat in the kitchen for another long time, oblivious to the cooling beans. Una was always perceptive. Too perceptive. As a child, she was the first to notice when I lied to my parents or tried to hide something. When I was young, she knew at first sight that Miriam was the one, even though I wasn't sure yet. And later, already an experienced prosecutor, she looked at Terrence as if she could see through his impeccable suit and perfect manners. "Be careful with him," said he. "He's got something of the kind of guy I put behind bars on a regular basis, the ability to say exactly what they want him to say." But I brushed off her words. Maternal instinct, I thought. She's just protecting me, like a little sister who had to grow up too soon, and now she's going to see what my house has become, what I've become. I spent the next 3 days trying to make the house look good. I pulled out the old photos I'd hidden from Terrence and arranged them in the living room. He found a box of books in the garage that he deemed worthless and therefore hadn't taken, wiped the dust off his mineral collection. But what could I do with empty rooms? With no furniture? With the shabby walls that hadn't been painted in years? With the fact that I barely had enough food for myself, let alone guests? Towards the evening of the 3rd day, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. Terrence. Unusually early. He usually came on Fridays, but today was only Wednesday. I went out on the porch. "Dad!" The fake smile on his face didn't reach his eyes. "I brought groceries and your medicine. How are you?" "Thank you, son. I'm fine," I replied, helping him bring the bags in. I looked inside the usual stuff. Canned goods, bread, milk, and the cheapest vegetables. A week's supply, no more. "The pharmacy raised the prices again," Terrence said, setting the vials of pills on the kitchen table. "I had to pay extra." I nodded. Another lie I pretended to swallow. In reality, I knew insurance covered all my medications in full. Chloe at the drugstore had let it slip once when Terrence excused himself to his car. By the way, Terrence, I got a call from your Aunt Una. She's coming to Pendleton and wants to visit us on Wednesday. He froze, his hand with the milk carton halfway to the fridge. Aunt Una? Why? There was a worry in his voice that he couldn't hide. She's traveling with her husband for work and decided to check up on me. I haven't seen her in a while. Terrence turned to me, his face a strange expression, a mixture of irritation and anxiety. And you agreed, of course. It wasn't a question. Of course it was. It's my sister. We haven't seen each other since your mother's funeral. Terrence set the milk down and stepped closer, his always neatly shaven face contorted, his lips pressed into a thin line. Dad, I don't think this is a good idea. You know how she feels about us. Always thought I wasn't good enough for the family. That's not true, Terrence. It's not true? He snorted. Who was it who always said I should have been a scientist instead of going into finance? Who was always comparing me to that perfect Lloyd of hers? I sighed. Old grudges, many of which existed only in Terrence's imagination. She'd never said anything like that. And anyway, they were on their way. Terrence started pacing around the kitchen, muttering something to himself. Then he stopped suddenly and looked at the empty walls, at the old furniture, at the leaks in the ceiling. She'll see the state of the house. She'll think I don't take care of you. He pounded his fist on the table. Shit! Why didn't you tell me before? I would have been prepared. Terrence, I just found out. What did you tell her? He interrupted me. About us? About me taking care of your finances? His voice was full of panic, fear of exposure. It wasn't a big deal. We don't talk much. He'd calmed down a little, but he still looked worried. It's okay. All right. I'll get some furniture from our basement. It's old, but it's better than empty rooms. And we'll get some groceries, proper groceries. Something to eat. I can buy my own groceries, I said, suddenly proud. If you bring my money. Terrence stared at me. Dad, you have arthritis. It's hard for you to carry bags, and you don't know how to choose your groceries sparingly. They're my guests, Terrence. I want to meet them and treat them myself. He opened his mouth to object, but then changed his mind. All right, he said at last. I'll bring you $200 from your pension, but let's be careful how we spend it. $200. Out of my $7,000 pension? I didn't say it out loud, just nodded. A small victory, albeit a bitter one. Terrence left but came back the next day with furniture. An old armchair, 2 chairs, a small coffee table. He arranged them in the living room, moving from corner to corner like a stage manager setting the stage for a play. It looks better, he said, stepping back to assess the result. But it's still not perfect. Why don't we buy some flowers? For atmosphere. I didn't bother to remind him that Miriam loved fresh flowers and always kept them in the house until he said it was a pointless waste of money. The evening before we left, Terrence suddenly put his hand on my shoulder, a gesture I hadn't seen from him in years. Listen, Dad, he began in a suddenly serious tone. I know Aunt Una is going to ask questions. About your house, about your life, about me. She's always been curious. Perceptive, I thought. Observant. Just don't go into detail, okay? He continued. Don't tell her about our financial affairs. It's a family thing between us. She's never understood our situation and will only make things more complicated. You know how lawyers like to inflate problems. I looked at my son, a successful 40-year-old man who was afraid of my little sister the way a schoolboy is afraid of a strict teacher. I'm not going to complain, Terrence, I said, but I won't lie if she asks. His face contorted for a moment. Lie? Who said anything about lying? All I'm asking is that you keep it to yourself. Don't tell outsiders about our private affairs. Una is not a stranger. She's my sister, Sarakuri, who you haven't seen in 5 years. Terrence raised his voice. Who has never come to see you while I take care of you every week. I buy your groceries, your medicine, pay your bills. And now she shows up out of nowhere and what? She's gonna judge me? Us? I didn't say anything. In some ways, he was right. Una really didn't visit much. But that didn't mean she didn't care. It was just that life had thrown us into different cities with different concerns and responsibilities. Terrence must have taken my silence for agreement. His face was calm again, even friendly. That's great, Dad. I'm glad we understand each other. I'll come by tomorrow and bring you the grocery money like I promised, and maybe something else for the house, so Aunt Una can see we're doing well." When his car went around the corner, I stood on the porch for a long time, watching the headlights go by. For the first time in a long time, I felt something like hope. Una's impending visit had obviously frightened Terrence. It meant that he had something to hide, that he realized the wrongness of his actions. Back in the house, I walked through the rooms looking at the new and old furniture, the pictures, trying to see my home through my sister's eyes. Would she see the truth behind the hastily created decorations? Would she notice how my life had changed since Terrence had taken control of my finances? I wasn't going to complain, as my son had asked, but if Una asked me directly, could I lie? For what? For the sake of maintaining a relationship with a son who only saw me as a source of income? These questions swirled in my head as I prepared for sleep, and though I had no answers, for the first time in a long time, I felt that my life could change, that there was a ray of light in the darkness in which I had existed for the past few years. A ray of light named Una. On the day of Una's arrival, I woke up with the first rays of the sun. I'd been awake since the night before, tossing and turning, imagining the upcoming meeting, replaying possible conversations in my head. Terrence kept his word and brought $200 from my pension, which I used to buy food for dinner. For the first time in a long time, my refrigerator was filled with more than just basic groceries. I decided to make roast vegetables, a dish Una had always loved as a child when our mother used to make it on Sundays. The recipe was vaguely remembered, but I hoped I had kept the basic elements correct. While the meat stewed in the old pot, I checked the cleanliness of the living room for the 100th time, straightened the mantel on the couch, dusted off the coffee table Terrence had brought. The house still looked half empty. The newly acquired furniture only emphasized the absence of everything else. The walls, once covered with photographs and paintings, were now gaping patches of light where the paint hadn't burned off from the sun. The bookshelves were almost empty, just a few geology journals and old textbooks that Terrence didn't consider valuable. About 5 o'clock in the evening, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. My heart jumped. Had Una arrived early? But no, it was Terrence in his new SUV, which he said was necessary for work, although I knew he rarely left the office of his finance company. "Dad, I thought I'd stop by and see if everything was ready." He glanced around the living room, smelling the roast. "Smells good. Are you sure you're up to it?" "I've been cooking dinners since before you were born, Terrence," I replied with a touch of irritation. He ignored my tone. "I brought a couple more things for the house, just to keep it cozy." From the trunk, he pulled a vase of artificial flowers and a wall clock that I vaguely remembered. I think it had once hung in Miriam's in my bedroom until Terrence had taken it away for safekeeping. "Put the vase on the dining room table," he commanded, hanging the clock, "and I'll arrange the flowers so they'll be visible as soon as you enter." I watched his fussing with a strange detachment. Terrence seemed genuinely concerned about the impression the house would make on Una. But it wasn't my well-being he was concerned about, only how he would look in my sister's eyes. "And another thing, Papa," he turned to me, his face suddenly serious. "I'm staying for dinner. I think it's only right to meet Aunt Una with the whole family." It was unexpected. Terrence usually avoided family gatherings, citing busyness. "As you wish," I answered, trying to hide my surprise. "Did you tell Esther?" "Esther was busy with the kids today. Oliver has rehearsal for the school orchestra," he answered quickly. Too fast. I knew it was a lie. My grandson Oliver had dropped out of clarinet lessons over a year ago, after Terrence had decided that music education was a waste of money. But I didn't confront my son with the lie. Not today, not before meeting Una. At 6 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. Terrence, still fidgeting with arranging knickknacks, froze. I took a deep breath and went to open it. Una stood on the doorstep, still slender and straight, though there was more gray in her dark hair. Next to her stood Lloyd, a tall, thin man with kind eyes behind round glasses. "Seti!" Certain. Una hugged me with unexpected strength. She smelled of the same light floral fragrance that she had smelled when I was a child. "Hello, Cedric," Lloyd shook my hand. "It's good to see you." Come in, come in." I stepped aside to let them into the house. "Terrence is here too, having decided to join us for dinner." Una froze for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Terrence? How unexpected. I thought he'd be busy as usual." There was that distinctive tone in her voice that I remembered from my childhood, when she doubted the truth of my explanations for a broken window or a missing cookie. We made our way to the living room, where Terrence was already waiting, a strained smile on his face. "Aunt Una, Uncle Lloyd," he stepped forward, extending his hand. "How nice to see you after all these years." "Terrence," Una nodded, barely touching his hand. Her gaze was already sliding around the room, noting the empty corners, the absence of many of the items she remembered from her last visit. "It's spacious," she said, turning to me. "Where's Miriam's piano? And her bookshelves? And that big couch we could all sit on?" I opened my mouth, but Terrence beat me to it. "Dad decided to simplify things," he said with a smile. "Sakonechonom. It's hard to take care of a lot of furniture at his age. Dust, you know. And there's more room to move around." Una shifted her gaze from Terrence to me, one eyebrow raised, a gesture of skepticism I remembered from childhood. "Really, Seti? You've decided to simplify life? You who collected books and minerals so that you could barely turn around in the house?" "It was a decision made over time," I answered evasively, not wanting to start a confrontation right away. Una didn't believe me, but she didn't insist. "Well, let's sit down. We have so much to talk about." We settled in the living room, Una and Lloyd on the couch, me in my chair, Terrence bringing a chair from the kitchen and sitting down so that it was like a barrier between me and the guests. The conversation was general at first, about Lloyd's work at the university, about Una's latest endeavors as legal counsel for a large company after retiring from the prosecutor's office, about their children, now grown and in different cities. "How are your grandchildren, Terrence?" Una asked when the conversation naturally turned to the younger generation. "Oliver and Lillian, right? How old are they now?" "Oliver is 14 and Lillian is 12, Terrence answered proudly. "Both of them are doing well in school. Oliver plays in the orchestra and Lillian does gymnastics." I couldn't help but correct him. Oliver hadn't played in the orchestra in over a year, and Lillian had quit gymnastics when Terrence had decided it was too expensive. "Wonderful," Una smiled. "And they must visit their grandfather often?" Terrence tensed slightly. "Not as often as I'd like. You know, school, activities, friends, teenage years. They're all so busy." Sure, Una nodded, but I could see the same look in her eyes that I'd seen in the courtroom when she'd questioned a witness she doubted. "What about you, Seti? What are you doing now that you're retired? Are you still interested in geology?" I answered, feeling strangely relieved to be able to just talk. "Sometimes I work in the garden, though not as much as I used to." "The garden?" Una glanced out the window at the overgrown plot. "Yes, I can see that. What about your mineral collection? You were always so proud of it." "I gave most of it to the local museum," Terrence intervened before I could answer. "Dad thought it was better than keeping them at home where no one could see them." Una looked at me, waiting for confirmation. "Some of the collection is indeed in the museum," I said slowly. "I don't remember making that decision, though." Terrence coughed. "Dad, remember when we talked about this last spring? You agreed it was for the best. I didn't remember that conversation, but I decided not to argue. Not now." "Shuktut. You may be right, son," I said quietly. Una glanced at Lloyd, and I noticed her husband nodded faintly. They always understood each other without words. "Well," Una clapped her hands together, "it smells delicious. Shall we move on to dinner?" The atmosphere at the table became even more tense. I served the roast, which, to my relief, was quite edible, though not as good as our mother had made it. "Seti, you were always a good cook when you wanted to be," said Una, cutting off a piece of meat. "Remember how you used to cook for us when our parents went away for the weekend?" I smiled, remembering those times. "Yes, although back then my culinary arts were limited to sandwiches and scrambled eggs." "It was still delicious." Una turned to Terrence. "What about you, Terrence? Cooking for your family?" "Esther does it," he answered briefly. "She's better at it." "I see," Una nodded, exchanging glances with Lloyd again. "How do you usually eat, Seti? When there are no guests?" Terrence tensed, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Usually," I stammered, unsure of what to say. Should I admit that I mostly ate canned food and cheap pasta, or maintain the illusion of normalcy that Terrence had worked so hard to create? Dad has certain dietary restrictions, Terrence interjected. The doctor recommended a simple diet. Nothing too fancy. Really? Una turned to me. What doctor said he? What kind of diet? Dr. Freeman, Terrence answered quickly. He's been seeing Dad for a few years now. I didn't know any Dr. Freeman. My last visit to the doctor had been over a year ago, and that was only because I'd fallen in the bathtub and Chloe from the drugstore had insisted on a checkup. Una seemed to notice my confusion. She set her fork aside and looked me straight in the eye. Seti, I'm going to be frank with you. I'm worried. The house looks abandoned. You've lost weight since the last time I saw you, and something about this situation doesn't add up. She took a deep breath. I know you get a pension of about $7,000 a month. That's more than enough to live comfortably. But from what I'm seeing, Terrence set down his water glass abruptly. Aunt Una, with all due respect, my father's finances are a family matter. Family? Una raised an eyebrow. You mean yours and his? Or yours, his and mine? Like his sisters? Look, Terrence tried to smile, but it was unnatural. I take care of Dad. I manage his money because at his age, it's hard to deal with bills and payments and stuff. It's not a topic worth discussing over dinner. When is it? Una asked bluntly. When my brother is living in an even emptier house? Or when he can't support himself at all? Terrence's face reddened. You come here once every 6 years and you think you can judge the situation? I'm here every week. I buy his groceries, his medicine, pay his bills. With his money, said Una calmly. Of course it's his money, Terrence raised his voice, but I manage it in a way that ensures his safety and well-being in the long term. And that includes an almost empty house. Una put her hand around the room. The lack of proper food, the neglected garden he'd always loved so much. Una, I intervened, trying to soften the situation. Please don't. No, Seti. She turned to me, her eyes full of determination. I have to ask, where does your money go? $7,000 a month is a lot of money. Even with all the expenses for house, food, medicine, you should still have enough to live comfortably. There was silence. Terrence looked down at his plate, his face still red. Lloyd, who had been silent most of the evening, was watching intently. Yeah, I started, but Terrence suddenly looked up. Okay, you want to know? He looked directly at Una, his voice sounding strangely proud. I'm giving my father's money to my wife. What? I stared at my son, not believing my ears. Yes, Dad. Terrence turned to me. You never asked me directly, and I didn't see the point in explaining. Esther handles our family finances. She always has. Your pension goes into the general budget, and she decides how the funds are allocated. Your wife handles my brother's pension? Una said it slowly, as if tasting each word. And how much of that money goes directly back to Cedric? Terrence shrugged his shoulders. Madre, as much as is necessary. Papa lives modestly. He doesn't need excesses. Modest? Una raised her voice. You call that frugal? Your father almost starves in a half-empty house while his pension goes to your common budget? Una, please, I tried to intervene. I was ashamed of the truth that everyone had now heard, ashamed of letting it happen. No, Seti, Una put her hand on mine. It's called financial abuse of an elderly person, and as a former prosecutor, I know it's prosecutable. Terrence laughed, but it came out nervous. Abuse? Don't exaggerate, Aunt Una. Dad voluntarily handed over the management of his finances to me. Voluntarily? Una turned to me. Seti, did you sign any documents? A power of attorney to manage the finances? Anything. I shook my head. No, it's just that after Miriam died, Terrence offered to help with the finances. I'd been in dire straits at the time, and it seemed like a good idea. Una nodded, her face becoming even more determined. And you haven't had full access to your pension since then? No, Terrence transfers money when he needs to buy something. $200, Terrence put in. I gave my dad $200 for this dinner, just a little while ago. Sabrudawarn, 200 out of 7,000, said Una. Less than 3% of his own money. Terrence was beginning to look really worried. Look, this all sounds worse than it is. We care about Dad. It's just in our own way. Una silently pulled her cell phone out of her bag. What are you doing? Terrence asked tensely. I'm calling Stella Richmond. She's an attorney specializing in elder law and a good friend of mine. Una dialed the number and put it on speakerphone. Stella? It's Una Huxley. I need your professional advice. Right now. The voice on the other end of the line sounded clear and businesslike. Una? What's wrong? I'm at the home of my brother, Cedric Blackwell. His son Terrence has admitted to taking his father's $7,000 pension and giving it to his wife, leaving his father to live in a virtually empty house without proper food or medical care. No official paperwork has been signed to manage the finances. I want to file a report for financial abuse of an elderly person. Terrence jumped out of his chair. What? You can't do that. This is a family matter. Stella on the other end of the line clearly heard his exclamation. Is it the son? She asked. Is he present at the conversation? Yes, we're all at dinner, replied Una calmly. Good. Mr. Blackwell Jr., I strongly suggest that you ensure your father has full access to his finances immediately. Otherwise, based on what I've heard, there is every reason for a serious investigation that could end very badly for you. Terrence stood leaning on the desk, his face pale. There's been some misunderstanding, he muttered. I was just helping my father. Una, Stella continued, I can prepare the documents tonight. We can start the process tomorrow morning, if your brother agrees. Everyone looked at me. I felt strange, a mixture of shame, relief, and some new, unfamiliar feeling. Perhaps it was hope. Yes, I said quietly but firmly. I agree. Terrence looked at me as if he'd seen a ghost. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked completely paralyzed with shock. Great, Stella said. Una, bring your brother to my office by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Mr. Blackwell Jr., I recommend you come too, preferably with an attorney. The call ended, but the silence in the room continued. Terrence was still standing, leaning on the desk as if his legs refused to hold him up. You can't do this, he finally said. Dad, tell them. Tell them I care about you. I looked at my son, the 40-year-old man I'd raised, loved, worked for all these years. And for the first time, I saw him for who he was, not through the filter of fatherly love and excuses, but simply as the man who had used me. No, Terrence, I said quietly. You didn't care about me. You were using me, and I let you do it for too long. He stared at me wide-eyed, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. And then, like a marionette with its strings cut, he slowly sank back into his chair, unable to utter a word. After Terrence left, Una, Lloyd, and I sat at the table talking for a long time. Most of the talking was done by Una, explaining to me the process I had to go through to regain control of my finances. I listened with a stunned feeling, as if I were underwater, where all sounds were muffled and distorted. Shetty, are you listening? Una touched my hand. It's important. Yes, of course. I tried to concentrate. The documents, the lawyer, the possible investigation, and new bank details, she added. Stella will help open an account that only you will have access to. You'll need to contact the pension fund and redirect the payments. Terrence won't back down easily, Lloyd remarked, voicing his opinion for the first time that evening. He'll fight, especially if the money is an important part of the family budget. Let him fight. Una straightened up, and I saw in her the same determined girl who had once defended me from the neighborhood bullies, even though she was 3 years younger. The law is on our side, and so were the facts. Una and Lloyd stayed with me that night, although Terrence hadn't completely emptied the 2 guest rooms, though the beds were old and worn. I couldn't sleep for a long time, replaying the events of the evening, Terrence's confession, his shocked face when Una had called the lawyer. Part of me felt guilty, not for my son, but for Miriam. I had failed her, failed to raise our son to be decent and caring. In the morning, Una drove me to the office of Stella Richmond, a short, energetic woman with a short haircut and a keen eye. Terrence didn't show up, though he'd gotten calls and left messages. Instead of meeting in person, he sent an email through his corporate lawyer, denying any allegations of financial abuse and insisting that everything was done with my consent. And typical first reaction, Stella commented as she looked through the email. First denial, then attempts to justify, then pressure on the victim to deny the allegations. Victim. It was strange to hear that word applied to myself. I am the victim of my own son. The thought seemed absurd and painful at the same time. What now? I asked, feeling tired of the whole process, even though it had just begun. Now we act decisively, Stella answered, gathering the papers into a folder. We open a new account, change the details for pension payments, submit an official application to the prosecutor's office, and prepare for resistance from your son. The day passed in bureaucratic bustle, banks, notaries, official letters. By the time Una brought me home in the evening, I felt exhausted but strangely refreshed, as if after a difficult but necessary operation. They're coming, Seti, Una warned me as we sat in the kitchen drinking tea. Terrence and probably his wife, they'll try to persuade you to give it all up. I know, I nodded, looking out the window at the dark garden. I'm ready. Are you sure? Una looked at me doubtfully. Hecco, you've always been soft, Seti, especially with Terrence, always forgiving him for everything. That was before, I answered, surprised at the hardness in my voice. It's different now. Una and Lloyd left the next morning. They had appointments in town. They offered to put things on hold and stay with me, but I insisted I could handle it on my own. I needed to learn to stand my ground without my sister's support. Terrence and Esther showed up toward evening. I heard their car pull up, 2 doors slamming instead of the usual one. They didn't ring the bell. They just opened the door with their key and came in as if they had every right to do so. Daddy! Terrence's voice sounded concerned, but I could hear the fake notes in it. Are you in here? I was sitting in my office, so I didn't go out to meet them. Let them look for me. Let them feel some of the insecurity I'd felt for years in my own home. Probably in the study, I heard Esther's voice, sharp and impatient. Where else would he be? They found me at the desk, poring over old geologic specimens. A small part of the collection that Terrence hadn't had time to donate to the museum. Honor, Dad? Terrence stopped on the doorstep, his face a strange mixture of irritation and worry. We have to talk. Esther stood behind him, a thin woman with sharp features and cold eyes. She always looked at me as a burden, never hiding her attitude. Good evening, Terrence, Esther. I nodded to them without getting up. To what do I owe this visit? Terrence hadn't expected such a welcome. He's used to me being always happy to see him, always grateful for any attention. This is serious, Dad. He came into the room and sat down across from me. Esther remained standing at the door with her arms crossed over her chest. This situation with your sister, we need to clear it up. It's already very clear, I said calmly. You've been taking my pension and giving it to your wife. For years, leaving me practically destitute in my own home. Don't exaggerate, Esther interjected, her tone as sharp as a whip. You had a roof over your head, food, medicine, everything you needed. Necessities? I looked at her for the first time in the whole conversation. The bare minimum to survive, not live. And that's on a $7,000 pension. Look, Dad, Terrence stepped forward, his voice softer. I know the situation doesn't look good, but we really cared about your money, invested it, built up a financial cushion in case of serious medical expenses. Invested it, I repeated, feeling the bitterness rising inside me. Invested in what, for instance? Terrence hesitated, his eyes flicking to his wife for a moment. Various projects, stocks, bonds, long-term investments. And where are the reports on these investments? I asked. Where are the account statements? How come I've never seen them? Because you don't know anything about it, Esther cut in, stepping forward. Terrence tried to explain it to you, but you always said you trusted him and didn't want to get into the details. That was true, partly. I did say I trusted my son, but I never refused to see reports on the movement of my own money. They were just never offered to show them. Never mind, Terrence said, seeing that this line of argument wasn't working. Dad, this situation with the lawyers, the statements, do you realize what it looks like? Your own son stealing money from his father? If this goes public, my reputation will be ruined. My career will suffer. And my life? I asked quietly. It had already suffered, for years. Don't be so dramatic, Esther snorted. Nashorin, you had a normal life. I looked at her, and suddenly a moment from 10 years ago came to mind, the last Christmas we'd celebrated with Miriam. Esther, then Terrence's fiancée, was looking around our house, our gifts, appraisingly. "You must be well provided for in your old age," she said then. And Miriam noticed later that her voice was not complimentary, but calculating. "Miriam saw right through you," I said to Esther, not even planning to say it out loud. "She'd warned me." Esther turned pale, then red with anger. "How dare you?" She stepped forward, but Terrence stopped her with a gesture. "Dad, let's not do this. We're not here to fight. We're here to find a solution to a problem." "A problem you created," I pointed out. "The one your sister created," Terrence countered. "Everything was fine until she came here and started poking her nose into other people's business." I shook my head, marveling at his ability to distort reality. "Nothing was fine, Terrence. I'd been living in a half-empty house while you handled my money." "That's an exaggeration." He raised his voice. "You never complained. You never asked for more." And then I remembered another moment from the past. Terrence was about 12 and wanted a new bicycle. Miriam and I decided that he should earn some of the money himself by running errands around the house and helping neighbors. He worked for a week, and then we discovered that the money he supposedly earned was actually taken from Miriam's wallet. When we confronted him, he cried and accused us of not loving him enough since we made him work when we could just buy what he needed. "You've always had a way of shifting blame," I said, looking at my grown son and seeing him as that manipulative 12-year-old. "Always finding a way to make it someone else's fault. Even when he stole money from Mom's wallet to earn money for a bicycle." Terrence looked surprised that I remembered the episode. "It was 40 years ago, Dad. I was a kid." "Yes, but the pattern hasn't changed," I realized with crystal clarity. "You still take other people's money and think you're entitled to it?" "That's not the same thing." Terrence was outraged. "I'm taking care of your finances, not stealing them." "Really?" I leaned back in my chair. "Then where are they? Show me the statements. Show me where all that money has gone over the years." Terrence was silent, his face stony. "I think we're getting off the subject," he said at last. "The point is, if you go on with these charges, with these lawyers, it's going to destroy our family. Your grandchildren are being teased at school. Do you want that? Another manipulation, another attempt to make me feel guilty." And I remembered another episode. Terrence is 15. He failed an important school project and got a failing grade. Instead of admitting his laziness, he blamed me for not helping him, even though I was on a geology expedition at the time. Miriam knew the truth, that he hadn't even started the work, preferring to spend time with friends. But I still felt guilty, even wrote a letter to his teacher, asking for a second chance. "Don't use the kids, Terrence," I said firmly. "They had nothing to do with this. And I doubt they're being teased, considering the case hasn't even gone to trial yet." "But it will," Esther intervened. "And everyone will know. The whole town will be talking about how the old man is out of his mind and blaming his own son." I looked at her with pity. "You know, Esther, I never understood what Terrence saw in you. Now I do. You and he are the same. You both think you're entitled to other people's things." Her face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful old man. We've taken care of you for years and you've—" "That's enough," Terrence interrupted her, seeing that the conversation was going in the wrong direction. "Dad, let's be specific. What do you want? More money for expenses? We can increase your monthly budget, return some of the furniture?" "No problem." And then I realized he still doesn't realize the gravity of the situation. He thinks he can buy off small concessions by keeping control of the bulk of my pension. "I want all my money, Terrence," I said calmly. "Every dime of it, and a full account of where it's gone all these years." Terrence turned pale, and Esther made a strange sound, something between a chuckle and a sob. "It's impossible," Terrence said after a pause. "The money is invested. You can't just pull it out." "Then the paperwork for that investment." I didn't back down. "Official papers proving that the money was really invested and not spent by you." They looked at each other, and I could see the panic in their eyes. There was no investment. They had just spent my money all these years, leaving me with crumbs. "Dad, you don't understand," Terrence started again, his voice becoming pleading. "We bought the house we live in. We took out a mortgage based on a steady income. If your pension stops coming into our account, we could lose the house." A house bought with my money, I pointed out. With our money, Terrence objected. Yes, your pension was part of your income, but Esther and I worked too. And how much of the mortgage payment was my pension? I asked bluntly. Half? More? Terrence was silent, and that silence was more eloquent than any answer. That's what I thought, I nodded. You bought a house you couldn't afford with my money, without my consent. You would have agreed if we'd asked, Esther said with a challenge. You always agreed to everything Terrence suggested. Because I trusted him, I answered, my voice trembling. So because he's my son, and I thought it meant something to him. There was a heavy silence in the room. Terrence stared at the floor, avoiding my gaze. Esther was shifting from foot to foot, clearly anxious to end this conversation. Well, Terrence finally said, looking up, it looks like you've made your decision, and it's going to destroy our family. Another manipulation, another attempt to make me feel guilty. And then I remembered another moment from the past. Terrence was 18, had just gotten his driver's license, and had wrecked our car racing with his friends. Instead of pleading guilty, he accused us of buying an unsafe model. No, Terrence, I said, shaking my head. Our family was destroyed by your actions, your greed, your willingness to use your own father. That's not true, Shiru. He jumped up, his face red with anger. I have always cared for you. I've always been there for you, unlike Aunt Una, who shows up every 5 years and tells us how to live our lives. Caring looks different. I remained calm, which only seemed to make him angrier. Caring doesn't leave a person hungry in an empty house. You're being dramatic, Terrence raised his voice. You've always had food, always had a roof over your head. The bare minimum to survive, I repeated, on a $7,000 pension. Terrence pounded his fist on the table, making the mineral specimens bounce. You ungrateful old man, after all we've done for you? And in that moment, I saw him for what he really was, not a loving son, but a manipulator, used to getting what he wanted at any cost. A man for whom I was not a father, but a source of income. I stood up, leaning on the table, feeling a sudden strength and determination. I want you to leave, I said quietly but firmly. Now. And don't come back until you're ready to give me a full accounting of my money over the years. You can't kick us out, Esther was outraged. This is our home too. No, Esther, this is my house. I looked her straight in the eye. Son, fully paid off by me long before you came into our lives, and I want you to leave. Now. Terrence looked like he'd been slapped. He opened his mouth to say something, but then closed it, unable to find the words. You're going to regret this, he said at last, his voice a strange mixture of threat and despair. When you're all alone, with no family, no support, you'll realize what a mistake you've made. I've already been alone, Terrence, I answered calmly. All those years after your mother died, you just gave the illusion of caring while you took my money. He stared at me for a few more seconds, his face changing from anger to disbelief, from disbelief to a strange desolation. Then he turned and left the room, Esther following him, casting one last venomous glance at me. I heard them leave the house, the front door slam, their car start and drive away. And when the sound of the engine faded into the distance, I sank back into my chair, feeling a strange mixture of devastation and release. In the silence of the empty house, I remembered other moments. How Terrence had manipulated me as a child. How he'd used my love for him to get what he wanted. How Miriam sometimes tried to open my eyes to his behavior. But I always defended my son, always found excuses. He's just a kid. He'll get better as he gets older. All kids cheat sometimes. How many times did I say those phrases? And this is what it led to. My son grew up believing he could take advantage of others, including his own father, with impunity. I failed him, failed to set boundaries, failed to teach responsibility, and now we're both paying the price for my parenting mistakes. After the confrontation with Terrence and Esther, I felt a strange mixture of devastation and release. Una returned the next day and, seeing my condition, insisted on staying a few more days. Lloyd was away on his business at Pendleton University, and my sister was fully committed to my situation. I need to know everything, Seti, she said, arranging some papers on the kitchen table. All the details of how Terrence got control of your finances, when it started, how it happened. I sat across from her, warming my hands over a cup of tea. The day was overcast, a light rain drizzling from the sky, pounding the roof with a monotonous beat. It started after Miriam died, I began slowly. I was not at my best, you remember. Una nodded. She came over then, spent 2 weeks with me right after the funeral, but then she had to go back to work and her own family. Terrence offered to help with the finances, I continued. Said it was hard for me to think about things like that right now, that he'd take care of everything. And you said yes. Yeah, it made sense at the time. I could barely bring myself to get out of bed, what with all the bills and payments. Did you sign any documents? Una pulled out a notebook, started making notes. Power of attorney? Anything official? I tried to remember, but that period was a blur. Miriam's death, the funeral, the endless string of days when I just existed without living. Maybe. He brought some papers, I signed them. Without reading, I felt ashamed to admit it. Don't blame yourself, Una read my mind. You were in a vulnerable state, and he took advantage of it. I should have been more careful. Miriam always said I was too trusting, especially when it came to Terrence. Una put aside his pen and took my hand. Listen, Seti, you trusted your son. That's normal. What's not normal is that he abused that trust. I nodded, but the guilt wouldn't go away. So many years wasted, so much money slipping through my fingers. Tell me how it happened, Una continued. How did he manage your finances in practice? I told her everything I could remember. How initially Terrence had actually handled all the payments, bringing me checks to sign, showing me account statements. How gradually that transparency faded. How he started saying that, for convenience, he had set up my payments to be automatically deducted from his account. How he suggested that he would withdraw cash for my daily expenses, so I wouldn't have to worry about ATMs. How, over time, those amounts got smaller and smaller, and the expense reports more and more vague. A classic case of financial abuse of an elderly person. Una shook her head as she took notes. Gradually increasing control, isolating the victim, creating dependency, all under the guise of caring. I don't feel like a victim, I objected. I feel like a fool. You're not a fool, Seti, my sister said firmly. You are a father who trusted his son. He is the one who should feel shame, not you. The next day we met Stella Richmond again. Her office was in a modern building in downtown Pendleton with panoramic windows and a minimalist interior. Stella greeted us like old acquaintances, even though I had only seen her once. I have good news, Mr. Blackwell, she said as we settled into the meeting room. The bank has agreed to open a new account for you under a simplified procedure, given the circumstances. We've already sent a notice to the pension fund about the change of payment details. How soon will this happen? Una, who was sitting next to me, asked. The next payment will go to the new account, Stella replied. I used my connections to speed up the process. I felt strangely relieved. For the first time in years, I would be in control of my own money. I'd be able to decide what I wanted to spend it on. I wouldn't have to beg my own son for crumbs from my own pension. What about past payments? Una asked. The money that Terrence had actually embezzled over the years? Stella sighed, her face serious. It's more complicated than that. We need to prove that the finances were managed against your will, Mr. Blackwell, or that your son deliberately misled you. That would require documents, account statements, possibly witness testimony. We'll find the evidence, Una assured her. My brother lived in near poverty for years while his son embezzled $7,000 a month. It couldn't have happened without intent. Stella nodded, but I could see doubt in her eyes. There were hundreds of cases like mine, and not all of them ended in favor of the victims. There's something else, the lawyer continued. Your son contacted me, or rather his lawyer, a Mr. Prentice of Prentice and Associates. And what did he want? I asked, feeling my shoulders tense. He offered me a meeting, said your son was willing to discuss the situation and come to a compromise. He insists that everything was done with your consent and for your own good. Una snorted. Of course he insists. What else can he do? Confess to financial mismanagement? I agreed to the meeting, Stella continued, ignoring her sister's comment. I think we need to hear what he has to say, and maybe get some answers about the fate of your money, Mr. Blackwell. When? I asked, feeling a strange mixture of anxiety and determination. At 2 o'clock this afternoon, here in my office. If you're ready, of course. I looked at Una, who squeezed my hand reassuringly. We'll be here, she answered for both of us. We had a few hours before our appointment, and Una and I decided to spend them walking around downtown Pendleton. The weather had improved a little, the rain had stopped, though the clouds still hung over the town. I remember walking here with you and my parents, Una said as we passed the city park. You always stopped at the pond to watch the ducks. Shireen, and you were always raring to go to the playground, I smiled, the fastest on all the swings. We walked slowly, my legs no longer the same as in my youth, but Una patiently adjusted to my pace. We talked about the past, about my parents, about Miriam. We avoided only one topic, Terrence and the upcoming meeting. But as we sat in the cafe over a light lunch, Una did bring it up. Are you ready to see him? She asked, stirring her coffee. After everything that had happened, I wondered, was I ready? No, you weren't. No one is ready to face the betrayal of their own child. But I had no choice. I had to do it, I said. For myself. For Miriam, who always wanted me to be able to stand up for myself. She would have been proud of you, Seti. Una smiled sadly. She always said that underneath your softness, there was a steel rod. It just takes the right circumstances to bring it out. We got back to Stella's office at 2 o'clock sharp, and it turned out that Terrence and his lawyer and Esther were already waiting for us in the conference room. When I saw them, I felt my insides tighten, but I took a deep breath and entered the room, Una following me like a bodyguard. Dad, Terrence stood up, taking a step toward me, but I stopped him with a gesture. His face was a mixture of hurt and embarrassment, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. He was assessing the situation, calculating the odds. Esther sat beside him, her back unnaturally straight, her face a stone mask. Next to them was a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, probably Prentice's lawyer. Oh, please sit down, Stella said, pointing to the chairs opposite Terrence and his group. I think we have a lot to discuss. I sat down trying to stay upright, though my back was aching from the long walk. Una sat next to me, her presence giving me strength. So, Stella began, opening a file folder. We're here to discuss Mr. Cedric Blackwell's financial situation. Mr. Prentice, your client has expressed a willingness to compromise. We're listening. Terrence's attorney coughed and straightened up. First of all, my client would like to emphasize that everything that has been done with his father's finances has been done with his full consent and for his benefit. There was no malicious intent whatsoever. Let's leave that part out, Stella said dryly. We're not here to discuss motives, but to find a solution to the problem. All right, Prentice nodded. In that case, my client is ready to provide a full account of the flow of funds for the last 2 years and return control of the finances to his father. However, he asks you to consider that certain financial commitments made by the family were based on the perceived long-term availability of those funds. In simple terms, you spent Mr. Blackwell's money and now you can't pay it back? Stella clarified. Not exactly, Terrence interjected, ignoring his lawyer's cautionary gesture. Dad, listen to me. Yes, we used part of your pension for our needs, but we've always taken care of you, provided everything you needed, all the necessities. Una couldn't take it anymore. You call starving in a half-empty house the necessities? That's an exaggeration, Esther jumped up. Cedric never starved. He always had food. The cheapest food you could find, Una countered, on a pension of $7,000. Ladies, please, Stella interjected. Let's get back to specific numbers. Mr. Prentice, is your client prepared to provide a full financial statement? The lawyer hesitated, then pulled a thin folder out of his briefcase. Here's a report for the last 2 years. My client is willing to discuss compensation for that period if it can be shown that the funds were misused. And the previous years? Una asked. This went on for at least 5 years. Unfortunately, the earlier documents have not survived, Prentice replied with an expression of fake regret. Convenient, Stella commented, taking the folder. She opened it, took a quick look at the contents, then handed it to Una and me. I looked at the columns of numbers and a wave of anger rose inside. My pension, $7,000 a month, was paid in full into Terrence and Esther's account. Of that amount, an average of $800 a month went to my needs: food, medicine, utilities. The rest went to their mortgage, their car, their children's education, traveling. This is outrageous, I said, struggling to find the words. Less than 15% of my own money was being spent on me. Dad, you don't understand, Terrence said, stepping forward. We were investing some of the money, creating a financial cushion in case you had serious medical expenses. Where are those investments? Stella asked. I don't see them in the report. They're in long-term investments, Terrence stammered. They can't just be withdrawn. Documents on those investments, the lawyer demanded. Official papers proving their existence and your right to dispose of them on Mr. Blackwell's behalf. Terrence looked at Esther, and I saw the same look of panic in their eyes that I'd seen the last time we'd met. We can provide them later, Prentice interjected. The question now is how to move forward. What my client is proposing is this. He's giving control of his father's pension back to him, but he's asking for a 3-month transition period to adjust his finances to the new situation. Unacceptable, Stella replied. Control is coming back immediately. We have already drawn up all the necessary paperwork. As for compensation for previous years, we are ready to discuss this separately after we have provided full financial documentation. It will ruin us. Esther couldn't take it anymore. We have a mortgage. Our children go to private school. At my father's expense, said Una. Maybe you should have thought of that before you built your life on an old man's money. Esther jumped up, her face contorted with rage. You have no right to judge us. You show up once every 5 years and you think you know everything about our lives? We took care of him when you weren't around. Esther, please, Prentice tried to calm her down, but she waved her away. No, let them know. She turned to me. You ungrateful old man. After all we've done for you, you're willing to destroy our family because of the plots of this. Una, my sister introduced herself calmly. A former state's attorney who specialized in financial crimes. Nice to meet you. Esther faltered, but then she came at me with renewed vigor. If you keep this up, if you don't drop the charges, you'll never see your grandchildren again. Never. You are no longer family to us. I looked at this woman who was screaming in my face, threatening me with excommunication from my own grandchildren, and felt a strange calmness. For years I'd been afraid of this very thing, of being all alone, of losing the last link to my family. But now sitting here, I realized that I'd been alone for a long time. What Terrence and Esther had suggested had never been a real family. It was an illusion I'd created for myself out of fear of loneliness. That's enough, Mrs. Blackwell, Stella said sternly. One more outburst like that, and I'll ask you to leave the meeting. Threats won't help your case. They're not threats, they're facts, Esther snapped, but sat back down. Terrence, who had been silent during his wife's outburst, finally spoke. Dad, please, think about what you're doing. Are you really willing to destroy our family over money? No, Terrence, I answered calmly. I'm not destroying the family. I'm restoring justice. And I'm protecting myself since no one else will do it. But we cared about you, he insisted. Yeah, maybe not perfectly, but we did the best we could. $800 a month out of $7,000. I looked him straight in the eye. That's not caring, Terrence. That's exploitation. He looked away, unable to bear my gaze. Okay, Prentice intervened, seeing that the situation was getting out of hand. Let's get back to the business part. We agree to the immediate transfer of control of the pension to Mr. Blackwell. As for compensation for prior years, we are willing to discuss a reasonable amount given my client's financial ability. A reasonable amount is a full refund, Stella replied, but we are willing to discuss a payment schedule if your clients provide full financial documentation. Prentice nodded, though it was obvious he didn't like the idea. We'll consider that option. One more thing, Stella added. My clients would like to know what happened to Mr. Blackwell's personal possessions, the furniture, the mineral collection, the family heirlooms that had been removed from his home in recent years. Terrence tensed and Esther turned pale. Some of the stuff is in our house, Terrence admitted reluctantly. The other part had been sold to cover some expenses. Sold? I couldn't believe my ears. My mineral collection? Miriam's piano, our family photos. Not everything, Terrence answered quickly. Just some of the items. And we kept all the pictures. I want everything back, I said firmly. Every last picture, every last chair. That will be included in our agreement, Stella nodded, making notes in her notebook. Mr. Prentice, your clients are required to make a complete list of the property that was taken from Mr. Blackwell's home, including its current location, or, if it was sold, when and for how much. We didn't keep such a record, Terrence protested. It's impossible to reconstruct. Then we'll have to rely on Mr. Blackwell's memory, Stella countered, and in case of doubt, decide in his favor. The meeting continued for another hour or so. The details of the transfer of control of the accounts, the return of the property, the possible compensation were discussed. Terrence gradually gave in on all points, seeing that he had no choice. Esther was silent, only occasionally casting hateful glances at me. When all the formalities were settled and the documents were signed, Terrence tried to talk to me alone. Dad, please, he intercepted me as I left the office. Let's discuss this as a family, without lawyers and accusations. I looked at my son, the 40-year-old man I'd raised, loved, worked for all my life. And for the first time, I saw him not through the filter of a father's love, but for who he was. A man who had cheated me for years, used me, taken everything he could from me. We've had the opportunity to discuss this as a family, Terrence, I answered quietly. For years, you chose a different path. It was Una who turned you against me. His voice was desperation mixed with anger. She'd always disliked me. No, Terrence, you turned me against yourself. By your actions, your deception. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw a mixture of emotions. Rage, fear, distrust, and somewhere deep, almost imperceptibly, shame. Maybe there was a part of him that realized what he'd done was wrong. If you keep this up, he finally said, if you don't retract your accusations, we're not family anymore. Do you understand? You'll never see your grandchildren again. I don't see them much anyway, Terrence, I replied with a sad smile. I had them. When was the last time? Christmas? 3 years ago? He couldn't find anything to say, because it was true. My grandchildren, Oliver and Lillian, came to see me very rarely, always under the care of Terrence or Esther, and their visits were always short and drawn out. Goodbye, Terrence, I turned to leave. You're going to regret this, he said after me. When you're all alone with no family, no support, you'll realize what a mistake you made. I didn't answer. There was no point. Terrence's words were just another attempt at manipulation, another threat designed to make me back down. But I was no longer afraid of being alone, no longer afraid of losing the illusion of a family that was really just a mask for exploitation. Stepping outside, I took a deep breath of fresh air. The rain had stopped, the sun peeked out from behind the clouds, and the whole of Pendleton seemed to glow with new colors. Una, who was waiting for me at the entrance, took me under her arm. Are you all right? She asked anxiously. Yes, I answered, and realized with surprise that it was true. For the first time in a long time, I was actually okay. The first thing I did when I got access to my finances was go to the bank and withdraw $1,000 in cash. Just because I could. The wad of bills in my hands seemed unreal. I hadn't held that much money in years, not since Terrence had taken over my finances. The cashier, an older woman with kind eyes, looked at me with mild bewilderment as I took a long time to smooth out each bill before tucking it into my wallet. But I didn't care. It was my money, earned by me, and it was up to me to decide how I spent it. Una stayed in Pendleton for another 2 weeks, helping me sort out paperwork, bills, organize the return of furniture and belongings from Terrence's house. Lloyd joined us at weekends, and we dined together in nice restaurants, because I could afford it now. I treated them, insisted on it, though Una tried to pay herself every time. Seti, you don't have to, she said, trying to grab the bill. I know, I replied, not letting go of the paper. That's why I want to, because I can decide for myself. By the end of the month, I had my first pension, $7,000. I looked at the numbers on the ATM screen and could not believe my eyes. With such money, I could not just exist, but live a full life. Stella and her team continued to work on my case, gathering evidence of Terrence's financial malfeasance. My old neighbor, Mrs. Donovan, testified about how the condition of my house and myself had changed over the years. Chloe from the pharmacy confirmed that my medications were fully covered by insurance, even though Terrence always said he had to pay extra out of his own pocket. Even an old family friend, accountant Raymond Pierce, found documents in his archives that proved the value of items from my mineral collection, many of which Terrence had sold for next to nothing. Gradually, my belongings were returned. Terrence, apparently realizing the seriousness of my situation, began to bring furniture, books, photo albums. Most of my mineral collection was sold, as was Miriam's piano, but some of it was returned. "I didn't want this, Dad," Terrence said, bringing in another box of old things. It was all Esther's. She insisted. I didn't respond to his excuses. There was no point. He was always looking for someone to pass the responsibility on to, as a child to friends or teachers, now to his wife. The house was slowly filling up with familiar objects, becoming more settled, but I still felt I didn't want to stay here. Too many memories, both good and bad, were tied to these walls. I wanted a fresh start, in a place unburdened by the past. "I'm thinking of moving," I told Una over dinner in the middle of the second month of my new life. She took a break from her salad and looked at me carefully. "I shouldn't want. Where to?" "Maybe closer to you and Lloyd," I answered, surprised at my own determination. "Philadelphia. Or the suburbs. This house. It's too haunted." Una nodded understandingly. "I know a great realtor in our neighborhood. I can put you in touch." And so began my new life. The search for a house took 2 months. I wanted to find something compact but cozy, with a small garden and preferably a separate office for my future mineral collection. Yes, I decided to start collecting again. Not because I wanted to recreate what I had lost, but because it had always been my passion, something that brought me joy. I found a house in a quiet suburb of Philadelphia, a 1-story, 3-bedroom house with a spacious living room. It had a small but well-kept garden, and most delightful of all, a glassed-in veranda facing east. I could imagine having my morning coffee there watching the sunrise. The sale of the old house in Pendleton was surprisingly quick and profitable. The real estate market was booming, and I got almost double what I expected. This money, together with my pension and the compensation that Terrence eventually agreed to pay, albeit in installments over 5 years, allowed me not only to buy a new house without a mortgage, but also to put aside a substantial sum for unexpected expenses. The move was both sad and uplifting. I was saying goodbye to the home where I had lived most of my adult life, where I had raised my son, where I had been happy with Miriam, but I was also looking forward to starting a new phase. Una and Lloyd helped organize the move, hired a crew of movers, and handled the paperwork. I was eternally grateful for their support. For the first time in many years, I felt not like a burden, but a person who was cared for simply because they loved me. Moving day was sunny and warm. I walked around the empty house one last time, saying goodbye to every room, every corner. The bedroom where Miriam and I had spent so many years was where I stayed the longest. I thought I could still feel her presence, smell her scent, hear her laughter. "I'm starting a new chapter, Miriam," I whispered to the empty room. "I hope you would approve." The truckload of stuff went ahead, and I went with Una and Lloyd in their car. The drive to Philadelphia took almost all day. We stopped for lunch at a roadside cafe, talking about the future, about plans. "Are you sure you don't want to live with us?" Una asked when we got back in the car. "We have plenty of room, and it would be our pleasure." "I'm sure," I nodded. "You've already done more for me than I could ask for, but I need to learn to live on my own. I need to learn to live on my own, without looking to anyone else." Una squeezed my hand understandingly. "You've always been independent, Seti. You just forgot about it for a while." My new house greeted me with silence and the smell of fresh paint. The real estate agent had taken care of the cosmetic repairs before I arrived. We started arranging furniture and unpacking the next day. Una insisted that I spend the first few nights at their place until the house was really settled. By the end of the week, the major work was finished. My new bedroom was cozy, with a large window overlooking the garden. I had organized my study so that I could work with minerals. Good lighting, a sturdy desk, shelves for specimens. In the living room, I arranged the photographs, the ones I'd managed to get back from Terrence, and some new ones taken with Una and Lloyd during my stay with them. And then, about a month after the move, when I was just getting used to the new place and the new rhythm of life, Terrence showed up on my doorstep. With him were Oliver and Lillian, my grandchildren, whom I hadn't seen in over 3 years. I was in the garden trying to revitalize the rose bush that the previous owners had said had once been the pride of the property. When I heard the sound of a car pulling up, I straightened, shook my hands off the ground, and froze when I saw the familiar silver SUV. Terrence got out first, followed by the kids. Oliver, now almost 16, looked exactly like his father at the same age, the same dark hair, the same stubborn chin. Lillian, 14, looked more like her mother, thin, with sharp features, but her eyes were mine, or rather, my mother's greenish-brown, speckled with gold. "Dad," Terrence smiled strangely, coming closer. "We were driving by and thought we'd stop by. The kids wanted to see your new house. I doubted they were passing through. It was almost a 4-hour drive from Pendleton to Philadelphia. And I doubted the initiative came from the kids, but I was glad to see them, regardless of the motive for the visit. Come on in." I gestured them in, taking off my gardening gloves. "I just made tea." The children entered tentatively, looking around with curiosity. Terrence followed them, his gaze glancing appraisingly over the furniture, the furnishings, as if assessing value. "It's a beautiful house," he said, as we settled into the living room. "It must have cost a pretty penny." "I can afford it," I said calmly, pouring tea. "Lillian, Oliver, how are you? School? Friends?" The children answered one-word answers at first, obviously feeling awkward. But gradually the conversation became more natural. Oliver talked about his passion for computer programming. Lillian about the school choir, in which she had recently started singing. "So, how's your clarinet, Oliver?" I asked, remembering how Terrence had bragged about his son's musical success at dinner with Una. The boy blinked incomprehensibly. "Clarinet? I've never played it, Grandpa. I tried the guitar a couple years ago, but it wasn't my thing." I looked at Terrence, who was suddenly very interested in the pattern on his cup. "I'm sorry, I must have gotten something mixed up," I said, not wanting to embarrass my grandson. After tea, I showed the children the house and garden. Oliver was interested in my new, still modest collection of minerals, and I told him about each specimen, where it came from, what its properties were, how it had formed in nature. The boy listened with genuine interest, asked intelligent questions. In him, I saw that spark of curiosity that Terrence had as a child, before the pursuit of money and status extinguished it. Lillian was more interested in the garden. She knew the names of many plants and told me that their school had a gardening club, which she had recently joined. I suggested she take some cuttings with her to grow at home, and her eyes lit up with excitement. Terrence watched us from the veranda, his face impenetrable. When the children were engrossed in exploring the garden, he came over to me. "They missed you," he said quietly. "Especially Lillian. She's always asking about you." "I miss them too," I replied, watching my granddaughter carefully cut a rose cuttings, following my instructions. "They could have come more often," Terrence continued, and in his voice I caught the same note I'd heard all my life, the beginning of manipulation. "If you'd reconsidered your compensation, these payments, they're taking a serious toll on our budget. We're barely making ends meet. This is it, the real reason for the visit. It wasn't the kids wanting to see me, it was Terrence using them to manipulate me again, like he always did." I looked at my son, the man I'd raised, the man I'd loved against all odds, and felt not anger, but exhaustion and frustration. "Terrence," I said quietly, so the children wouldn't hear, "if you try to use the grandchildren to pressure me again, I'll sue you for breach of contract. And believe me, Stella will be happy to take the case." He went pale, then reddened with anger. "You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't ruin the children's relationship with their grandfather." "I'm not the one destroying it, Terrence. You're the one teaching the kids that relationships are a way to get what you want, not an expression of love and caring." He wanted to say something, but at that moment Lillian came running up to us, holding the cuttings carefully wrapped in wet paper. "Grandpa, thank you so much. I promise to take good care of them, and I'll send you pictures when they bloom." "I'll be waiting, sweetheart," I smiled at her, feeling my heart grow warm. Despite everything that had happened to Terrence, these kids weren't to blame. And I wasn't about to give up my relationship with them. Soon they were gone. Terrence was somber and silent, but the kids promised to come again, without their father, if he would let them. I gave them my phone number. the email address Lloyd had helped me create. Lillian immediately wrote everything down in her phone, and Oliver promised to send links to interesting mineralogy articles he found on the internet. As their car rounded the corner, I went back into the garden and got back to work on the rosebush. Working with the earth always calmed me, helped me to put my thoughts in order. I thought about Terrence, about his attempt to manipulate me through the children, how little he'd changed, despite everything that had happened. But I also thought about how much I'd changed myself. A year ago, I probably would have succumbed to his manipulation. I would have agreed to reduce the amount of compensation or to refuse it altogether, just to preserve the illusion of a family relationship. But now I saw the situation clearly, without the rose-colored glasses of paternal love. Terrence would never change. He will always look for ways to use others for his own gain. And my job now was not to try to change him, but to protect myself and perhaps help his children grow up different. Una called in the evening, as she has done almost every day since I moved in. "How are you, Seti?" Her voice was warm, caring. "I had a surprise visit," I answered, and told her about Terrence and the kids coming. "It was to be expected," Una sighed. "He always used any means to get what he wanted. How do you feel about that?" I thought for a moment. Strangely, but good. I saw his maneuver right away, didn't give in, and I think I'm finally starting to realize that a relationship with Terrence is never going to be healthy. Not because I haven't tried hard enough, but because he's unwilling or unable to change. "That's an important realization," Una said after a pause, "accepting that some relationships can't be fixed, no matter how hard we try." "Yep," I agreed. "But I'm still glad to see the grandchildren. There's something good about them, despite the influence of Terrence and Esther." "Children often surprise us with their ability to grow strong and kind even in difficult circumstances," Una remarked. "Maybe your relationship with them will be an example to them of what true family ties can be." After my conversation with my sister, I sat on the veranda for a long time, watching the last rays of sunlight coloring the sky with shades of pink and gold. I thought about Miriam, about how she had warned me about Terrence's character, how she had tried to show me the truth I refused to see, about how she always said that true love didn't require sacrificing one's dignity. I thought of Una and her unexpected but so timely support, about how one visit from her had changed the trajectory of my life, pulling me out of the hole I had driven myself into. And I thought about the future, about feeling free for the first time in years, free to make decisions, free to spend my own money, free to live my life the way I want, not the way someone else decided for me. The road to complete healing would be a long one, I realized that. Years of financial and emotional abuse had left their scars. I still sometimes woke up in the middle of the night checking to make sure there was enough food in the fridge, still machine counted the change in my pocket, planning how to stretch it over the week. I still felt a pang of guilt when I bought something for myself. But now I had support. Una and Lloyd, new friends I'd begun to make in an older amateur geologist group I'd signed up for on the realtor's advice. I had grandchildren with whom I hoped I could build real relationships based on sincerity and mutual respect, not manipulation. And I had a new home, a place I could call my own, one that I could furnish to my liking, without fear of someone coming along and telling me that my wishes didn't matter. Cedric Blackwell, 73 years old, had finally begun to live for real. Not just exist, but live life to the fullest, with plans for the future, with hopes and dreams, without toxic relationships, without manipulation, without the constant fear of loneliness that forced me to endure humiliation. I watched the sunset and felt peace for the first time in a long time. Not anger at my son, not resentment for lost years, not fear of the future, just peace, and the certainty that, however long or short the rest of my journey might be, I would live it on my own terms, with the dignity and freedom that every human being deserves.